Hello, wonderful AP Gov students, and happy summer. This is the first video of summer prep for our course this year. And this is optional. You're not mandated to watch it. But what's not optional is the summer assignment. You want to have that done in order to be on par for taking the exam this year. So this is really a supplement that should help you with that. So what I'm going to go over today are powers and the Constitution. Not Austin Powers, right? But different powers that are in or not in the Constitution, I guess, dependent on your beliefs. But these are the terms. These are some of the terms that are on your summer assignment. So you notice there's like a section on the articles. There's a section on current events. There's a section on important documents. But there's also some terms. And these are just a couple of the terms so that as you go through them, this should help you and also give you a little bit of a foundation. I'm going to mention some things here that we haven't really learned a lot about yet, or at all yet, like federalism. So as these videos come together, the puzzle pieces will start fitting together. And also, we're going to be going over more in depth some of what I'm saying tonight. I'm going to mention a court case that we'll talk a lot about once the school year starts. But as you start getting these things together in little pieces, eventually the picture will come together and become more clear as we repeat them and go more in depth in the future. So this is made to help you. All right, so now after that long tangent, let's get started. So one of the powers in the Constitution, which is one of your terms, are concurrent powers. So concurrent powers are powers that the Constitution gives to both the national and state governments. All right, so time out a second. Before we get into this, it's really important to remember, right? Why was the Constitution being made and why were a lot of people critical of it? Well, the Constitution really created this federal system where we still have states, but now we have this national power. And what's the federal relationship between them? A lot of people were not happy with having a constitution because they thought it was going to take away all these state rights. So you're going to see a little theme here of the balance between maintaining state rights, what rights the states give up, what powers do the national government have. So you need to understand that that is, an issue, a debate, a tension going on. And it's an essential ingredient to what the federal government is. So concurrent powers are powers that both the national and state governments could have. Like they could both pay taxes. Lord knows I pay both state and national taxes, right? They can both build public works. You have state roads, federal roads. Both should be protecting against public health. We should have seen examples of both the state and national government doing something about COVID over the past few months. Elections, courts, and there's other examples as well. Now, let's do some SAT practice. When you're going through, like, an example, like, is this a concurrent power or an inherent power? Know what those words means. So concurrent means that things are happening at the same time. So at the same time, I can be taxed by the state and the federal government. At the same time, can a state road that I travel and a federal road that I travel be having their potholes fixed? Okay, so but a lot of this concurrent powers did have to deal with taxes because with the new government, a big issue was how to pay off debt, especially after the revolution and all that. So I mentioned here Alexander Hamilton. So hopefully you've been enjoying some Hamilton over the summer, the musical. We'll talk a lot about him this year. So Hamilton was one of the three people that wrote the Federalist Papers. We have Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. And the whole reason the Federalist Papers, which are one of the documents and in your assignment, were written is because a lot of people were a little skeptical about the Constitution. Like, do we really need this? I don't know if this is a good deal. So these Federalist Papers were all these being published to be like, oh no, this is what it says about this. This is how the Constitution says about this. This is why you should be on board. Okay, so Hamilton wrote he wrote the most of the Federalist Papers under the surname of Publius. And he mentions concurrent powers in a couple of them, but I'm going to refer right now to Federalist 32, where he says the state governments would clearly retain all the rights of sovereignty, like they still have some independent powers, which they had before, and which were not by, this act delegated to the U.S. Federal government. So he's saying like, hey guys, like, no, don't be afraid that you're going to lose all your rights. You're still going to have them, especially when it comes to importing taxes. So if I read a section here from Federalist 32, talking about imposing taxes on articles other than exports and imports, so like, goods within your own community, says, this I contend is manifestly a concurrent and co-equal authority in the U.S. and in the individual states. So the U.S. can tax these things, and you can too, as a state. Concurrent and co-equal. Equal, right? Not one above the other. And that was really important to persuade people. Okay, let's move on now to inherent powers. So inherent powers are powers that the national government has in foreign affairs, that the Supreme Court says, you know what, the Constitution does not grant you this, but like, because you're a national government and you have to deal with foreign countries, it sort of makes sense that you have these powers. We don't have to explicitly say like you have the power to talk to other countries. Like, of course you do, right? So basically, inherent powers are inherent if they're reasonable and logical. So I'll give you an example. We have our first two presidents, Washington and Adams, who didn't use a lot of the inherent powers. You can sort of say they did, but the real one to start off with is Jefferson. Now, Jefferson really grew the executive branch, the powers of the executive branch. And this was debated, and not everyone was fond of it at the time. But you have to think also, for Washington and Adams, we weren't really much of a international power yet, right? So in 1803, Jefferson used inherent powers to justify the Louisiana Purchase, where we basically doubled the United States. And he was looking through and he's like, I don't know if the Constitution gives me the authority to buy this. Like, do I need to consult Congress? But time is an issue. Congress will take too long and then we'll lose the deal. So they said, this is inherent, this is reasonable and logical. A lot of people were critical at the time now. Of course, like, of course that was a good deal. But, was it something that the Constitution really allowed him to do or not? So it's something we can debate. Inherent powers are still referred to today. In fact, just a few years ago, Supreme Court had ruled 6-2 in Dietz versus Bolden that the federal district courts have the inherent power to rescind a jury discharge order and recall a jury for further deliberations in a civil trial. So in other words, a court case has happened, the jury gives its verdict, and bing, bang, boom, it's done, and the jury leaves. And when the jury leaves, they hear things from newspapers, from the radio. People talk to them, oh, was that good or bad? Well, in this one case, they had to bring the jury back. And they're like, can they really do that? So not only does the executive branch have inherent powers, they said even the judicial branch has some inherent powers. So Justice Sonia Sotomayor, you see her there, wrote that this power is limited in duration and scope and must be exercised carefully because the potential of tainting jurors in the jury process after discharge is extraordinarily high. So you see that inherent powers are still even in our Supreme Courts. And the jury, is a big issue. So this book here, The Ratification, is all about how hard it was to get the Constitution ratified, and state by state. And it goes through all the debates and arguments and a lot of good stuff here. But it mentions when Pennsylvania was ratifying it, the issue of the jury was so important. So this is a little bit of a tangent here, but I thought it's important for us to understand as we learn about these branches. So Sir William Blackstone was not American, but his works on government were being reprinted and read a lot before a revolution. So even in 1772 in Philadelphia, this was being reprinted. And he said, juries, he said, preserved in the hands of the people that share which they ought to have in the administration of public justice and prevents the encroachments of the more powerful and wealthy citizens. To establish courts that did not use juries to establish facts was therefore a step towards establishing aristocracy, the most oppressive form of absolute government. So we really want to get this jury thing right. And even to this day, we realize how important juries are, and we realize how important inherent powers are. So I just wanted to show you how this all blends together. Usually inherent powers are used for an emergency. A famous example is when President Truman seized steel mills in 1952. That's what the image is of there below. So this is the beginning of the Korean War. There were steel mill strikes, and Truman basically said, like, no, we need to open, like, these steel mills need to be running. Nixon tried to use inherent powers to order domestic surveillance. The court struck that down. President Bush used inherent powers for detaining enemy combatants. President Trump has used them to direct federal employees to defy congressional subpoenas. It's still up in the air whether that was constitutional or not. Executive orders are sort of inherent powers, but not completely. So we'll get into all of that detail during the year. Okay, express powers. So express powers are powers that the Constitution specifically grants to one of the branches of the national government, and only these powers. Like, we expressly give you this power and just this. Now, I make that little face because we're not really going to get into that much. We'll go over this year, but as long as you have that for the terms, that's fine. You want to know more about enumerated powers, which is related, as you'll see. So enumerated powers are powers of the federal government that are specifically addressed in the Constitution. Like, these are the powers that you have. You can do X, Y, and Z. For example, like, you can coin money, right? You can impose taxes. Okay, so some people that believed, a strict interpretation of the Constitution say, like, well, that's it. All you have is those enumerated powers, and that's all you can do. So you see here we have Madison, who also wrote here in these Federalist Papers. And in Federalist 45, he said, the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. So what are those enumerated powers for the federal government? Things like war, peace, negotiations, foreign commerce, taxation. So once again, you see people are like, oh, we don't want an oppressive federal government. Like, that'll be just like the king that we fought against. Like, we want to maintain states having more of the powers. So this is Madison reassuring people again. So, oh, no. There's only a few and defined powers that the federal government has. Everything else will be the state governments, and they'll have numerous powers and indefinite powers, right? Now, once again, SAT prep here. What does enumerated mean? Think number, right? List one by one. These are the powers. You can do this, this, and that. Now, I want to show you also another part of the Federalist Papers, and this was referred to in many of the Federalist Papers, not just these two. But in Federalist 23, Hamilton said, the principal purposes to be answered by union are these: the common defense, right? Preservation of public peace, protecting from external attack, regulate commerce with other nations and between the states, superintendence of our intercourse, political and commerce with foreign countries. So I want you to think, if you go back to your freshman year, and we were learning about the Enlightenment, and you learned about Adam Smith. And Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, which was basically coming out in 76 when we were fighting our revolution. And he was like, this is what the government should do. Keep public works, maintain from invasion, and like keep the peace inside. So Hamilton is sort of like channeling some Smith here, being like, no, this is just what the federal government can do. Just these few things. Of course, we know our federal government does many more things than that now. We'll get into that, but you want to understand what they thought they were at the beginning of our country. Okay. Lastly, we have implied powers. Implied powers are powers that are inferred from the express powers that allow Congress to carry out its functions. So basically, it's a power that's not enumerated, but like, yeah, but I think it's implied, right? And this is where you get into the weeds of what can, what powers do they have in that example. So in Article 1, it says that you can make all laws necessary and proper for carrying into execution. Well, what's necessary and proper, right? So a big court case we'll learn about this year is from 1819, McCullough versus Maryland. And this was about the bank. Can a national bank, is it necessary? Can you force it upon the states? And two big outcomes. One is that this court case said the national government has supremacy over the states, right? If you went back to the constitutional ratification debates, people, if they could saw that in the future, they probably wouldn't have been happy about it. It also said the national government has certain implied powers beyond enumerated powers. Like, yes, it has all those enumerated powers, but there's a little bit more it can do as well. All right, so this was a really big court case for that reason. And you often hear this referred to as the necessary and proper clause or the elastic clause, which we'll, of course, talk more about. But it's good to start hearing these things now. Okay, so when you're filling out, your assignments, you're really just filling out like this little top part. You're not filling out everything I said here or everything that's typed on these slides. That would be too much. But like I said, hearing this now is starting to got the whole big picture is going to start filling in for you this year. All right, so I'll make another video next week. I can do more terms, I can do documents, I can do the articles. If you have requests, let me know. And or maybe there's one thing you're having more trouble with already if you're looking at it, let me know and I'll start doing those things first. Okay, hope all is well, everyone.